The last time we were together. Hi, Anai. It's so nice to see you. Well, see you kind of sort of. We missed you the other day. Oh, go Birds. Yes, that game was amazing. The halftime show was great. My kids were upset because Taylor Swift's boyfriend didn't win. And I told them, you win some, you lose some, right? All right, awesome. Please keep putting that into the chat. Um, I'm going to get us started because I want to be mindful of your time. I also want to be mindful of Kelly's time. So we're very excited this morning to have with us Kelly, who is, I'm hoping my screen will go to, there we go. Before I introduce Kelly, I want to talk to you all a little bit about Good Grief, who we are and what we do. I'm sure most of you know who we are, but I always just love talking about my organization and tooting its horn, as it were, right? So we all know that Good Grief, our mission is to build resilience in children, to strengthen families, and really empower the community to grow from loss and adversity. This is a big picture of what we do. Um, I say big picture because what we do is so much more bigger than this, but maybe I should start saying small picture of what we do, right? We offer family support services, and we do that in our centers, one in Morristown, where you will usually find me, and we do it in our center in Princeton, where you will usually find Evelyn. That's not to say there's some days Evelyn will be in Morristown and Annette will be in Princeton, right? But it's just so you know where we're mostly stationed, so to speak. We also do Good Grief Schools, where we go into the schools and kind of just help the administration as a whole become more grief informed. Now with the new grief bill in New Jersey, we are trying our best to kind of connect those dots, not just with administrators, but with classroom teachers, counselors, health and PE teachers, and kind of let them know, hey, we're here for you as well, as are the other organizations that work with grief across New Jersey. Next month, we have our Spring Institute. And for those of you that are on today that are in a school, hint, hint, you're going to want to come to this because our theme this year, and I hope I get it right, Evelyn, if I don't, please come off mute, is how to support the grieving student. Did I get that, Evelyn? Awesome. So it's a full day of professional development. It's a full day where you get a little sneak peek into what it is that we do. And our keynote speaker, Evelyn, could you let me know the last name again? I don't want
Yes,
to.
so we're very excited. Saturday, the 15th, Basking Ridge, New Jersey, the Pingree School. It is full day, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. We have an awesome keynote speaker. We have Dr. David Schoenfeld. He is from the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement and the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. He's done a lot of work in the school crisis and bereavement space, and he's going to be specifically talking about how to support grieving students. We'll also have an awesome panel of Good Grief families who have school-aged young people. We're going to talk about the supports that they received, the things that they wish they had. And we also have some sessions on trauma-informed grief support and one that's about the expressive arts with youth and grief support. So really hope to see all of you there. Yes, Amy, I can put a link in the chat. I'm happy to do that.
Yes, please. And I do hope that we see some of those who are in the schools come and join us, and we'll be able to take back to your schools some information about us and hopefully schedule some time for us to come in there and collaborate with one another. We also offer a ton of professional development and training, parent caregiver education, and community webinar series, just like the one that you are on right now. So these webinars are extremely important, not only to our organization, but to the community as a whole, because there's no cost that comes with these webinars. Sometimes it is someone from Good Grief, or as Evelyn likes to say, she likes to phone a friend. And today we phoned Kelly. But before that, I want to give a huge shout out and a thank you to the Lennar Foundation. Did I say that right, Evelyn? For the work that they do, collaborating with Good Grief, the donations that they give, and just being an all-around awesome org to help us. So our presenter today, as you can see, is Miss Kelly Cervantes. And I'm going to let Kelly introduce herself because I can do her no justice. I can write and list down all the wonderful things that she has done, but no one does that better than her. So I'm going to hand it over to you really quickly, Kelly. I'm going to stop my screen share so that I can see you all. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Thank you to Annette and Evelyn for having me here today. I am so grateful to be able to speak with all of you. So a little bit of background on me. I think I'm on my fourth career or lifetime, as I like to put them. I feel like I live an entire life and then something happens and then I like am starting over in a new life. It just like constantly reincarnating myself in this one single life that I have. So I started as an actress. I went to event sales managing in a restaurant, and then my daughter was diagnosed with epilepsy the exact same week that my husband was cast as Alexander Hamilton, and in the on the Broadway production and in Chicago. And so that is my life completely turned upside down. And that was where I'll sort of be starting a lot of my talk today. And then more recently, I have been finding ways to continue my own grief and healing journey through writing my book, Normal Broken, and I sit on several nonprofit boards. I host a podcast for Cure Epilepsy called Seizing Life. I have a blog called Inchstones, which you can find on Substack. You can find on my website, kellycervantes.com. I also post it on my Facebook and my Instagram. So I'm a little bit all over the place, and my therapist is currently telling me that I need to like scale back some of what I'm doing because maybe I've overcommitted myself a little bit. But I think once you have a medically complex child, everything else in life just sort of pales in comparison to that. And so I have a tendency of thinking that I can take on more than I can handle. But here we are. And this is, I get to talk to all of you, and of everything that I do, I think this is probably one of my favorite pieces of this hodgepodge of a career that I have put together in this fourth iteration of my life. So I'm going to share my screen, cross your fingers with me that it works because,
There it is.
all right. So this is, this is my welcome to the Normal Broken Club, to the Grief Club, um, the club that everyone eventually joins, I think, at some point in their life, but is terrified of or doesn't understand. And I'll get into why I call it the Normal Broken Club, but it is, I genuinely believe that we need to be having significantly more conversations around death, dying, and grief than we currently are. I adamantly believe that we should be celebrating the end of life in the same way that we do the beginning of life, the same way that we do births and birthdays. Let's have that same level of energy towards the end of life as well. And it has, I say that with the caveat that it has taken me a minute to get to this place. And I don't think that that is a goal of where to start, but I think it is a goal of where we can get to. So to start, this is my favorite part. I get to introduce you to my daughter, Adelaide. She is so freaking cute. So as I mentioned before, Adelaide, she was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was 7 months old. You know, early childhood, early infancy, we knew that she was a little bit delayed, but we sort of thought that it would be fine, that she would grow out of it. She was diagnosed with hypotonia. I thought, you know what? She is not going to be a athlete, and that is a-okay. We will figure this out. And then when she was 7 months old, she had her first seizure, and she was diagnosed with epilepsy. 2 days after we got out of the hospital, Miguel got the call that he would be Alexander Hamilton for 1 month on Broadway before our family would move to Chicago. That same day was also my last day working for Tom Colicchio's restaurant group in New York City, coordinating and selling events. And I was scheduled to start as a sales director at another restaurant group the following Tuesday. I was so excited about this job. It was a huge step up in my career. I was our family's sugar mama prior to this. That is actually what Miguel, my husband, called me. He would be in between shows. He did American Idiot on Broadway, and it was open for a year, and then it closed. And then he did If Then on Broadway with Idina Menzel for a year, and then it closed. And every time a show closed, he was unemployed, and we were back to relying solely on my income. And I bought our house, and it was my health insurance. And I really had a lot of pride and joy in my role as our family's provider. And that was a very complicated time for me. I think we tend to focus a lot on grief as the loss of a person, but there is so much that goes into grief as well. Even before my daughter would eventually pass away, I was grieving the life that I thought my family would have with two healthy children. I also have a son, Jackson, who's 3 years older than Adelaide, who you can see in the orange shirt in that picture. Um, I was grieving the loss of my career, which I had to give up to take care of her. I was grieving this piece of my identity um, as our family's provider, as this career woman. All of these pieces were part of how I thought of myself. They were part of how I thought of the future. And literally overnight in 24-hour period, I woke up the next day and my life looked entirely different. And I didn't realize that that was grief when it was happening. And I wish someone would have framed it to me that way, because instead I dealt with a lot of feeling selfish about what was going on in my life. And it wasn't until years later that I was able to put language to that and understand that what I was experiencing at that point in time was grief. 2 months later, when Adelaide was 9 months old, she would be diagnosed with infantile spasms, which is a particularly devastating form of pediatric epilepsy. I remember reading that if the child did not have any other conditions at that time, then it was very likely that they could go on to lead a typical life. But Adelaide already had several disabilities that she was battling against, and that was not going to be our story. Adelaide was, God, she was so feisty. She was nonverbal and non-mobile, but make no mistake, that doesn't mean that she couldn't still take purposeful action and communicate with us. If her brother squeezed her too tight, she had no problem swatting him across the head. It was her brother's mission in life to try and make her laugh, which, as her condition went on, became increasingly difficult. However, he would bring out his whoopee cushion, and that almost always got a laugh out of her because farts are always funny. And our home nurse, who we were able to um, receive the assistance of a little later in Adelaide's life, she would discover she was trying to play music for Adelaide one day, and she had on some traditional baby music, like Baby Shark, children's music, very up tempo. And Adelaide was kicking and screaming and not having it. And so our nurse was like, "Okay, girlfriend, I hear you." She switches it up and she's like, "You know what? Let's try some Frank Sinatra. Everyone loves Frank." And sure enough, Adelaide calmed. She opened her eyes. She started taking in the space around her, and we could see she was connected to a heart monitor and an a pulse ox for about the last half of her life. And we could see her oxygen levels go up and her heart rate come down, how this music was soothing her. And so, never assume that someone's disabilities preclude them from participating in the world around them. It is more often than not that the world around them is disabling their ability to participate in the world as they are. Um, that in a nutshell is my amazing girl, Adelaide. Um, Unfortunately, as time went on, we did test after test. I enrolled her in the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, which is funded through the NIH. I took her to doctors all over the country, and no one could tell us why she was having this array of symptoms. Um, I think a lot of people assume that epilepsy on its own is a diagnosis. Epilepsy is a symptom of something else. And in addition to that, she was battling dysautonomia and mast cell activation syndrome and hypotonia and all of these other conditions. And for the duration of her life, we never could figure out why she was enduring and suffering the way that she was. So she was born in October of 2015. By the spring of 2019, she was about 3.5 years old. We had sort of back-to-back MRIs, and it was determined that her brain was degenerating, and the doctors couldn't do anything about it. By the end of that summer, her decline was becoming increasingly rapid, and we entered hospice. And I cannot say enough wonderful things about hospice. I was terrified. I dragged my feet on bringing hospice into our home, and my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. Hospice provided our family the ability to, well, specifically the ability for me to be Adelaide's mother again and not just her caregiver. I had gotten so wrapped up in making sure that she was getting her medications at the right time, her feeds, which all went through a G tube, managing her medications, pharmaceutical, doctor's appointments. I didn't get to be her mother for a lot of the end of her life. And thanks to hospice, I was given that opportunity again. Hospice also came into our home and provided support to my son, Jackson. They helped us have difficult conversations with Jackson about his sister's health, about her death, the importance of using the word death, dying, so that he understood what was actually happening and not a lot of the euphemisms that our society prefers to use around end of life. We were able to make a plaster mold of them holding hands. We created a memory box together. All of these things helped Jackson to understand and begin a very, very early processing of losing his sister. He was only 7 when she ultimately died 5 days before her 4th birthday. I'm going to pause a little bit here because this quote is, I think this is really pivotal. And it really helped me understand grieving and the grief process. So, Mark Twain, nothing that grieves us can be called little. By the eternal laws of proportion, a child's loss of a doll and a king's loss of a crown are events of the same size. And I think there's something inside of us. It's human nature to feel like we need to compare or compete with our grief, as if there is some sort of hierarchy. And a lot of times, child loss in particular is placed at this very pinnacle of this grief pyramid. And I am here to tell you that if I won the Grief Olympics, someone needs to send me my gold medal in the mail, and I'm still waiting on my ticker tape parade because that has not happened yet. Or perhaps, as it turns out, when it comes to grief, regardless of what we are grieving, there are no winners, there are no losers. Grief is grief is grief, and loss is loss is loss. And I think particularly when we are talking about children, there is this this idea, we want to say, well, the kids will be okay because the kids are resilient. And you know what? Kids may be resilient, but they grow up, hopefully. And those resilient kids become far less resilient adults who need help. And so it is our responsibility to not diminish the grief of the children in the household, whether it is that they have lost a parent or they have lost a sibling or they have lost a grandparent or a friend or whatever that is, whoever is grieving, whether that is the adult or the child, whether they are grieving someone who is very much alive but is no longer with us, perhaps due to addiction or to abandonment or to whatever the case may be. This is all very real grief. And in fact, there is, when we start to rank grief, whether it is, if we are saying that someone else's grief is so much worse than ours, that diminishing of our own grief does not benefit us. It also doesn't benefit the person whose grief we are putting up on a pedestal. They are not comforted more because we think that their grief is more significant. That doesn't lessen their grief because we have more pity for them. The reverse of that, when we look at someone, and I am guilty of this. I am so guilty of this, and it's something that I check myself on regularly. People have a tendency to want to try and relate to us. So I lost a child and maybe someone comes to me and they're like, well, my friend lost their child, as if that, or when my grandparent died and I, especially early on, wanted to sort of scream and yell at them and be like, yeah, but that wasn't my child. This happened a lot when Adelaide was first diagnosed with epilepsy. I would have people come to me and they'd be like, oh, my dog has epilepsy. We just give them a pill and it's okay. And I'm like, that's great. Your dog is not my kid. What we don't know is someone's relationship to their person, to their grief. And so it does no one any good for us to lessen their experience. And it doesn't make us feel any better to raise our grief above someone else's. It just doesn't do any good. So we can relate to people, we can communicate about grief without having to compare, because again, there are 0 winners in the grief Olympics. It just doesn't do anyone any good. So before we move forward, I just want to make sure that whether you are here as a grief educator, whether you are here as a teacher, whether you are here as a griever, we are all in this same boat together. We all have the same goals, to heal ourselves and to help others heal. And what we are bringing to the table in terms of the terms of our loss, of our grief, is in this moment equal. They are all equal. And I think it's so important that we start on that even playing field. So after Adelaide died, broken feels tame to what I actually felt. I felt shattered. Once again, I shared about how I had lost my identity and my career when Adelaide was first diagnosed and I had to quit my job and Miguel booked Hamilton. And when Adelaide died, I went through all of that all over again. It was as if I had been forced into retirement from this job that I loved. Now, don't get me wrong, I resented being Adelaide's caregiver at the beginning. I resented having to give up my career and the sacrifices that I made, but I grew to be passionate about being her advocate, about being that primary caregiver, about knowing my daughter better than anyone else. I was her voice, and I grew to love that job. There is no job I will ever have that will ever compare with that one. And then I woke up one morning and I didn't have that job anymore. But it wasn't just my job, it was my identity. I had been so a part of this epilepsy, this disability, this medically complex community. And now I no longer had the child that had gained me entrance into those communities. I didn't feel like, I felt like the ultimate Debbie Downer hanging out with any of my friends of neurotypical children, my son's friends' parents. We would be there and it just felt like there was this cloud hanging over me. I was constantly questioning, were they looking at me? Were they wondering if I was over it yet, if I was healing? Were people thinking that I should be healing faster? Were they looking to me to see if they could move on yet? How did they need to respond to me? And I felt all of that pressure every single time I stepped out of the house, wanting people to never forget my daughter, and worried that they were going to. So feeling that I needed to bring her up. But then as soon as I brought her up, knowing that I was bringing this heaviness with me, even in my own home, I didn't feel like I fit in anymore. Miguel and I were grieving so differently. He got to go back to work after a couple weeks, and I didn't have a job to go back to. We just also are different types of people, and whereas I call them grief exorcisms, or werewolfing, where my grief would just take over me, especially in those early years. And I couldn't control it. We would be out to lunch and I would be like, you know what? I have to go to the bathroom. And if I don't get there fast enough, then I'm going to grief explode all over everyone in this restaurant. I would crumble on the bathroom floor. I would dig my nails into my thigh to try and feel physical pain to hold off this grief transformation. Miguel never showed any of that. For him, his grief was very personal and it was very private. It was something that he chose to do on his own by himself. Perhaps while he was walking the dog at night, picking up the dog poop is when he would think of Adelaide, when he would let those emotions come through and he would cry. And it was very hard. It was very lonely because that wasn't something that I could witness, that I could be there for him. And then there was Jackson, my son, who was 7. And of course, he was going to process this differently. He was devastated, of course, but he was also 7. And to a certain extent, his life got a little bit easier after his sister died. He got the full attention of both of his parents. When we read him stories, I didn't have one ear listening to hear if Adelaide's alarms were going off and she needed me to reposition her because she couldn't breathe. All of these things were going on inside of our home, and I felt so broken, round peg, square hole. I no longer fit in my life. It was about a year after Adelaide passed away. We are in the height of the pandemic, or I guess 6 months into the pandemic or so, and I have totally embraced quarantine. In those early days of grief, I had no need to go outside, to be anywhere. About days, actually days after Adelaide died, the Hamilton producers called Miguel. Hamilton in Chicago was closing, and they were offering him to return to Hamilton on Broadway. So our family had moved back to New Jersey, and that was where we were riding out the pandemic. I was perhaps a glass 2 or 3 of wine into the evening, and someone sent me an Instagram post about this grief retreat for mothers who had lost children. And I was like, wow, that sounds awful. I cannot imagine wanting to go to that. Um, and then the next morning I woke up and I had an email that said, we cannot wait to see you at the grief retreat. And I thought, oh, fudge. What did drunk Kelly do last night? Apparently, she signed me up for a grief retreat. I called my mom and she told me she thought it was a good idea, that I was a little bit stuck in my grief, and she was right. I didn't want to heal. I didn't understand what healing meant. I thought that healing meant letting go. I thought that healing meant moving on, forgetting, and that there was no way that that could happen. And I didn't know how to move forward and still honor Adelaide and still remember her. So I figured, you know what? We'll go to this retreat. We will see. Either it is amazing life-changing, wonderful, or it's terrible and I get really great writing material out of it. Turns out it was incredible. I All of the women who were there had all lost children. We had lost children at different ages, different stages of our lives from a variety of different causes, and we all came from different walks of life, all of the mothers. And it was our last night together, at one of the grief retreat leaders brought out a speaker. We were all sitting outside. There was a fire going, and she brings out this music and she starts playing like 90s pop and R&B, and somewhere between Belle Biv DeVoe and the Backstreet Boys, we are all up singing and dancing. And in that moment, for the very first time, I didn't just feel broken, I felt normal broken. I was still broken. Being with these women didn't take that pain away. But being with people who understood, who I didn't have to worry that if they saw me singing and dancing, they knew that I wasn't not thinking of my daughter. They knew that I still loved her. They knew that I was still grieving her, but I could still allow this moment of joy into my life. I could feel this sense of normalcy because I understood that what I was feeling was actually normal because it had been normalized by these women around me. I went home and started to understand that maybe I was ready to think about healing. My mother had sent me a stack of books, grief books to read, and I would get through like the introduction, and I struggled because they still all assumed that I wanted to heal, and I just wasn't there yet. Thankfully, a couple months after that, it was President Joe Biden's inauguration. Now, regardless of your politics, leave politics aside here. Um, this is a man who is very familiar with grief. He lost an infant daughter and a wife in a car accident, and he lost an adult son to brain cancer. Um, it was the night before his inauguration. He was presiding over a COVID-19 memorial. And in his speech, he said, "To heal, we must remember." I felt like I'd been hit by a Mack truck because I had never heard healing worded that way before. This was a revelation to me. Here was someone who understood grief intimately, and instead of telling me that healing meant that I just had to push forward with my life, I needed to get on with it, get over it. No, healing meant remembering. It meant finding a way to remember my daughter and carry her forward with me, not leaving her behind. And it took me a while to wrap my head around this, right? Because I had always envisioned my daughter being with me physically, and that was no longer an option. But there are lots of other ways that you can keep people with you emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And so I started to think of all of these different ways that I could continue to keep my daughter in my life. One of the best ways to do this was through understanding that we are just not that special. And I know that may sound harsh. We are still special in all of the ways that Mr. Rogers told us that we are. I promise you. But this grief thing, it's not special. Our journey, the people that we lost, what we are grieving, that is special. But how we are experiencing it and what we are feeling, that is not special. That is not unique to us. And the moment that we start to understand that what we may feel are irrational thoughts, we may feel that our responses, our reactions to things are that no one could understand, that's not true. There are people who will understand. And that is the first step that we have to take, is understanding that what we are feeling is not unique to us. And once we know that, it becomes much easier to start sharing those experiences and those feelings. During Adelaide's life, I had written a blog. I started a blog called Inchstones, and it was a way for me to write about this crazy life we were living with these high highs and these low lows. Miguel used to call our life in that time like holding onto a rocket in one hand and a parachute in the other. And I would write about that in this blog and the experience of medically complex parenting. After Adelaide died, I continued to write, but instead about writing about the complex parenting, I was writing about grief. And the more I wrote about grief, the more I felt people connecting with what I was saying, reinforcing this idea that what I was saying, what I was experiencing just wasn't that special. I started connecting with other people, not just from the grief retreat, but connecting with people online who had a similar experience. I wrote about how I really struggled with going to the grocery store. It made my anxiety go through the roof, and found out that, yes, there are other people out there that also, in their grief, one of their huge triggers is going to the grocery store. Even that wasn't unique to me. Feeling that sense of community, however we can find it, being through an organization like Good Grief, or finding a grief retreat or an online community. These are such integral parts to being able to share our story and to share our person with the world. Because at the end of the day, I don't know anyone, and I'm sure that there are people out there. I'm sure there are people out there, but I have yet to meet someone who is grieving someone and that's not like their favorite thing to talk about. We all want to talk about our loved one because we want to make sure that they're remembered. After Adelaide died, I really struggled with talking about her. I wanted to so much, but I would give me great anxiety. My least favorite question to answer was, how many kids do you have? It was so hard, and I couldn't figure out why, because I wanted to honor Adelaide. I was sorry that other people didn't get to meet her, but why was this question so difficult? And that was when we had gone through so many movies and shows during the pandemic, and this is maybe not one of my best parenting moments, but my son, we were trying to find something that we could both be interested in watching, and I suggested a Godzilla movie, and he was like, "No, mommy, I don't want to watch that. That's scary." And then, not proud parenting moment, I was like, "Well, they're not real," like trying to shame him into like watching it. And he turns to me and he goes, "Oh, mommy, well, it's not the monster that I'm scared of. I know that's not real. It's the people's reactions to the monster." Well, shoot. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't anxious about talking about my daughter. It was people's reactions to when I talked about her that was so upsetting. Once I realized that, that people's reactions were on them, that was their baggage that they were carrying along with them, then I didn't need to worry about their reaction anymore. It wasn't until a few months after that, I'd taken my son to a soccer practice, and there was a woman, her son and Jackson had become friends, but I had never met her. And I saw her and I tried to avoid talking to her because I was still not in a great communication place. But she saw me and she was excited to meet me. And she sits down and we're talking, and she asks the question, We know you have Jackson. How many other kids do you have? I told her about Adelaide, how Adelaide had died. And her response to me, I will never forget. She said, "What was Adelaide like?" Not, she didn't start crying. She didn't try to give me, well, at least she's in a better place or God needed another angel. She didn't try and make me feel better in some bizarre way. She didn't ask how she died. She just wanted to know what she was like. And I will never forget that. And to this day, when any people often ask me, what should you say when you find out that someone has experienced a loss? What do you say? And I think you say, I am so, so sorry. That really freaking sucks. Would you like to tell me about them? What were they like? Because you know what? I bet they do. I bet they do want to talk about them. Now, I think with children, it could be a little different. I look at my son, and his process has been, if my husband's is private, my son's is locked in a vault. And that was very, very difficult for me to accept for a long time. I wanted to be the person that he came to, but he didn't want to talk to me about it. I think he was trying to protect me. He didn't want to upset me any more than he already saw me be upset. And so he's kept a lot of his feelings on the inside. I'm grateful for therapists and that there are organizations like Good Grief out there that can work with our children, because I think sometimes it's very hard for children to have these conversations with their parents in particular. To be able to meet other children, to have those conversations with a therapist who is outside of the home. And then even now, that memory box that we created before Adelaide passed away, since then I've created photo albums of the two of them together. And while he will not talk to me about her, I do catch him looking through those photo albums. I find him going through the memory box on his own. And so I do know that he is processing. I do know that he is remembering, that he is working through it in his way. And I think it's such a difficult thing to remember that, yes, we all grieve differently and there is no right or wrong way. And even with our children, we have to give them space to grieve in the way that is healthiest for them, even if that looks wildly different from the way that we grieve, as long as we provide the supports to them, as long as they have the available supports around them that they can go to, so that we aren't assuming that a child will just be resilient on their own. As long as we are putting the couch cushions around them so that they can fall if they need to, then we are doing the best that we can do. And then just knowing that all of our kids are probably going to need therapy at some point because we're not perfect, right? And that's just part of this whole game that we call life. So this is the mantra that really got me through those grinding days of when I first started to think about healing. I was driving down the street, and I saw this mural that I had never noticed before. And it said, "We are surviving." Not, "We have survived." Not, "We are survivors." We are surviving. And I realized that we will always be healing, never healed. We will always be grieving. We are never grieved. We are surviving. And as long as we keep that action word, as long as there is no finish line in grief. There is no confetti that is going to come down. We are never going to go back to the people that we were. We are evolving into this next beautiful, hopefully beautiful version of ourselves. That's sort of the crappy thing about this, is that I recognize that I am a better person today for having known Adelaide than I was before she was born. She allowed me to see the world and to meet so many amazing people that I never would have met otherwise. And I am so grateful for that. I wish I had my daughter alive and healthy, but those aren't the choices that we get to make. I do not believe that things happen for a reason, but I do believe that we can make reason out of the things that happen. We can continue healing. We can continue surviving. We can continue grieving. I continue to grieve while I continue to enjoy my life. These are the important lessons that we take with us so that we can begin to allow that joy to come back into our lives. About 2 years after Adelaide had passed away, we got a phone call letting us know that there was a little girl in need of a home. Would we be willing to take her in? And we said yes. And Anessa came into our lives about 2 years after that. She was officially adopted by our family. She is pure sunshine and rainbows. She brought laughter back into our home. She is everything I didn't know that we needed. That's not to say that it's been easy. It's been very hard. She, like our family, has our own trauma. She has her own trauma as well. Adoption can be beautiful, but every adoption is born from a broken family. And I think that that's really important to remember. And maybe it's that our two broken families were able to find each other, and that there is some love and hope and beauty in that. Anessa was helping me to organize a cabinet in the house, and I'm pulling things out of this cabinet, and one of them was a wind chime that someone had made for us after Adelaide died, and I just never hung it up. It sort of got tucked away, like a lot of the things that we got after Adelaide died. I just couldn't deal with them at the time, and so they just got tucked away in whatever spot I could find them for them. But Anessa had lots of questions. What did it say? In memory of Adelaide Grace. And I asked Anessa if she would like to help me hang it up on our back porch, and she said yes. So we hang it up, and I don't really think anything else of it. A couple days later, we are coming home from preschool, and Anessa is coming up the back steps. There's a little breeze in the air, and the chime sounds, and I sort of smile, thinking of my little girl. And Anessa turns around and she looks at the wind chime and she says, "Hello, Adelaide." And then she continues walking and she gets to our back door. And she turns around abruptly and looks at me and she goes, "Mommy, you didn't say hi to Adelaide." "Hi, Adelaide. I miss you, baby girl." But in that moment, my two little girls were communicating and talking to each other. By keeping Adelaide's memory alive, by sharing her and talking about her, by healing through remembering, by moving forward in my life with my grief beside me, with my love for my daughter beside me, I get to continue living and bringing her with me and introducing her to more people. And there is nothing more beautiful or more healing than that. Oh, yes. Well, so my book, if I didn't mention it or put a picture of it, although there's directly behind me, also from my publisher, they would probably be pretty pissed at me. But I'm just so grateful to have shared, to have had the opportunity to share my little girl and my grief journey and the different things that helped my family as we worked through. And to that end, we are still grieving. We are still working through. I am constantly surprised and taken aback regularly by my grief, by my healing, by my children. And I am looking forward to answering any questions that you might have. Let me stop sharing my screen here.
Before we get into those questions, Kelly, I just want to kind of close this out from a place of extreme gratitude. I feel you know, we do this work, and I always say to Evelyn, man, you know, this has completely changed my entire, the way I look at everything, the way I parent, the way I speak to people. And I could not agree with you more that, you know, while we want our people here, obviously, you know, we recognize that there's something in us that has completely changed, like completely. I see colors differently. I see, you know, people's stories differently. I even hear, you know, of someone who's just not in the best of moods. I'm like, well, you know what, there's so much wonderfulness in the world right now. So, you know, and sometimes I feel like, man, am I falling into that toxic positivity that you were mentioning here? And I'm just so riveted by every single thing that you said. I mean, you don't know this, but off on the side, Evelyn and I were like, oh my goodness, this is just amazing. So thank you, thank you, thank you for not only sharing Adelaide with us, but sharing your son Jackson with us, sharing your husband, sharing your story. I think that it really resonated with us in a way that we're gonna never be the same from this, in a good way.
Thank
Mm.
So
you.
thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Yes, friends, if you have any questions, anything at all, please feel free to use the chat or use the Q&A. And while you all are thinking of some things, yeah, I just want to echo what Annette was saying. First off, I side chatted her and said, I'm nodding my head like she can see me.
We both
There
are
was,
like,
there was so much. I was like, yeah, yes, yes. But it was just, thank you for sharing everything with us. It was so raw and real and beautiful, and just listening to this, it just resonated with me in so many ways, you know, as a mom, as someone who works in the grief space. Um, oh my gosh, I feel like my soul just had a makeover. You are
Tara, that
incredible.
is probably one of the best compliments I've had. That is like, that is brilliant. I'm writing that one down. You're amazing. Thank you.
That was incredible. I mean, Kelly, I do have a question, because it sounds like, you know, you were blogging, you were writing, you were even talking about, well, you know, if Drunk Kelly signed me up for a bad retreat, I'll at least have some good material for later. Was writing always a part of your life, or was it something that you just found at some
I
point?
found it. So, you know, what's interesting is that I loved writing as a child. I loved, loved, loved. I used to write stories as a kid. I thought I was going to be an author when I grew up. I have notebook, well, not anymore. I think my mom threw most of them away. Notebooks and notebooks of like these crazy stories that I would write. And then I just sort of lost it at some point. I've journaled. I
Mm,
sort of, not consistently, but you know, during certain periods of my life, journaling has been a huge piece for me. And then when Adelaide was sick and I'm navigating this wild life where we're like, I'm with Miguel on the 50-yard line and he's singing the national anthem on Monday Night Football, but I'm also texting with our nurse who's a babysitter about how long Adelaide's last seizure was. And I'm like, what is this life? And I was like, I was inspired to start writing again.
mm,
Um, I don't think I realized at the time how cathartic it was going to be, how it was going to provide me a lifeline and a connection to a community, that people
mm,
would find me because we're not that special, and so they could understand and they could relate. And it was such um it was it was such a gift to myself to put my writing out there so that I could connect with other people, so that, I'd say, it's not, things don't happen for a reason, but you can make reason out of things that happen. And that, to me, writing was part of that. There's no reason good enough, justifiable enough for what Adelaide experienced in her life and how it affected us. However, that horrible thing that happened put a keyboard under my fingers and allowed me to find writing again. And if I can create books or blogs or community from that, then that is a positive step. Again, I'm not measuring those positive steps because it can never fill the bucket that was my daughter, but that doesn't prevent me or stop me from continuing to try and do good and make good out of this horrible thing.
Yeah, I'm hearing what it did for you personally, but also that community aspect. It was so present throughout this entire hour that we spent together, the importance of it. We do have one question in the chat from Jeff. He said, "Thank you so much, Kelly. You are amazing." And he wants to know if there's anything you learned since writing the book, on your book in stores, meeting people, things like that. I would imagine there's many lessons learned and many people that you've had the chance to talk to and connect with. Yeah.
Yeah, it has been, it's incredible hearing other people's stories and being able to listen. I think the biggest thing that I learned while talking to people is how much people do want to share their loved one, how much people actually do want to talk about their loved one. Because I get out there and I'm doing book signings and everyone wants to tell me about their loved one. And I'm so grateful that I can be the recipient of that. But it's a little bit bittersweet because I feel like perhaps a lot of people don't feel like they have that outlet where they can share the person that they're missing. And so that has been really eye-opening to me, that I think we all just really want to share and we want to talk. But I don't think we always feel like we have those spaces that we can do so.
For sure. I think we see that a lot, Evelyn and I, when we go into the schools, and there are some of those that are on the call right now that are part of our program team that also see that, where they so desperately want to tell you everything about them, but like you said earlier, what reaction am I going to get? I'm afraid of that reaction. So a lot of the work that we do is kind of destigmatizing that. Like, it's okay. It's okay to get choked up when you're talking about someone. That's all that unresolved love that you didn't get to give, that's what it is the love that's left over. And I'm so glad that you said that, because it gives others permission to not only ask, because sometimes, on the other side of it, like, do I want to see this person cry? We have this issue where we have to wear these masks. And I love that we're moving more towards just being authentic and being who we are, and seeing, okay, they're crying. That's okay. That's strength right there. That's vulnerability. That's wonderful.
Yes. And I think there's also something to be said specifically in children and in schools. So, my son does not talk about his sister that much. And and I've struggled that it hurts me that he doesn't talk about her. And I've had to sort of come to grips with, like, that's a me problem and not a him problem, and that there needs to be that separation there, just because I always want to talk about her. But then he surprises me, and in his science class this year, he's in 7th grade, and they were doing genetics, and he chose to write about eventually we found out that we donated her brain to science, and we were able to find out 4 years after she died what the genetic cause was. And he did his scientific presentation on the genetic mutation and talked about his sister in front of his science class, because that was a way that he felt comfortable doing it, because it was like in this class context. It wasn't just, it was as an assignment. And there was, I think a bit of a barrier, but clearly he still wanted to share about her. This was still something he was proud of, that he felt comfortable talking about. He just needed to find the right boundaries that made him comfortable in doing so. And I think that is so often the case whether it's children or adults, that we all want to share, but we need to find those safe boundaries that make us comfortable to share.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Wow. I just, that's
Yeah.
incredible, you know, and to be supported in that by his teacher, by his classmates to do something that, while academic, is completely vulnerable,
Yeah.
is just so, so beautiful. And my hope is that all kids have some kind of space where they can land, because maybe a support group, you know, coming to a peer support group like what we do at Good Grief, maybe that's not for every kid to, you know, talk about it or process it through play with other kids. You know, sometimes maybe it's more like what your son did, and just to have that time and that space and permission and support. It's so important.
Absolutely. And Jeff also has in the chat that, you know, he says, wow, that's incredible. Sometimes they don't know how to share. And that's so true. Sometimes they don't know, you know, how to do this because of those adults around him, you know, they or her, they're probably nervous, like, oh my goodness, if this child cries, then all my other children are going to cry. And what am I going to do? And so that's why I think that these webinars and the work that we do and the work that other organizations do is so important to kind of remind everyone to see things from a trauma-infused lens. You know, there's different ways to do things, different ways to talk to children, different ways to express your grief. I also really appreciated when you said you went on the retreat and you're jamming to Backstreet Boys and singing. You know, a lot of the times our kids do that too, right? They
There's
go
joy.
and there's joy, and then people are all like, why are you experiencing joy right now? Like, you should be like super, super sad. That doesn't mean that you're not sad, you know?
No.
Where grievers are entitled to that joy as well, you know. And sometimes you know, we tell stories about those that have died in our family, and they're hysterical stories, and we're crying, but we're crying because we're laughing so hard at these, you know, moments that we have, right? Because we want to remember them, we don't want to forget.
Yeah.
So, Kelly, I want to give you some space to just leave us with any final thoughts. But before we do that, Annette, could you please put the registration link for next month with Megan Reese? It's Glitter-Free Grief is next month, right? We'll be
Yes, I'm
talking
so
about
excited for that.
toxic positivity in the grief space, and some of those problems and pitfalls and things that we could do instead. So I think it's going to be a fantastic session. We hope to see you all there. The session is being recorded. We will also share a certificate of attendance to all of our friends that were here with us today. And yes, the hour has escaped a few of our friends, so they're asking for the recorded version. Yes, yes, yes. So Kelly, any last thoughts before we let our friends go for the rest of the day?
I just want to leave with a sense of gratitude that spaces like this exist, and you know that there is um, just a reminder that we all grieve differently, and to give ourselves the time and the space and the patience, that it is not a linear process, and um, that our loved ones are always with us, even if it's not the way that we wish they were.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelly. We appreciate everything that you do, being a friend of Good Grief. This chat is just, I need to just download this and send it to you, Kelly. You need to read this when you're having a hard
Oh
day.
yes.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
I'm getting the link up. My Zoom
yeah.
is being Zoomy, I guess is what I like to say.
But thank you, everyone.
All so much for being with us.
Take good care, and we'll see you next time.
All right,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
guys. Yeah, I think I put it in. I'm gonna stop our recording.